Good morning, everyone here and everyone online. I'm Katie Dalpiaz from here at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, and I'm helping host today's session. So you may see me in the chat collecting questions and taking attendance and helping facilitate this session. This event is AI from a Digital Humanities Perspective and is being presented by Mary Todd, an assistant professor and digital humanities librarian from the University Library. So thank you, Mary. And this workshop offers strategies for balancing innovation, ethics, privacy, and intellectual property, and accessibility to create more inclusive learning environments. Digital Humanities uses technology to support analysis, community, and connection. Situating AI among analog and digital technologies prepares educators and their students to engage with and critique our increasingly mechanized world. So welcome, Mary, and thank you. Interested to hear about this topic.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for helping me out today. So I can't see the chat or the participants list on this monitor. So Katie is going to be our digital humans representative. So I'll be turning to her for any kind of questions or comments in the chat. But I'm especially excited and grateful for Siddle for the opportunity to present and for all the conversations that are happening, this among them. So today's slides, excuse me, a little squeaky there. Today's slides are at go.illinois.edu/AI, the number 4, CITL. That's go.illinois.edu/AI for CITL, and they'll be available after the presentation, so you can always go back to them and refer to them. Our goals for today. So DH has been heavily influenced by educational theory, specifically activity theory. So we'll talk about what activity theory is as a framework for thinking about technology in the classroom, and then talking about how digital humanities approaches are part of that conversation. We'll also identify library resources to help you evaluate if, when, and how to engage with AI with your students. But before we begin, I want you to take a moment to think about what technologies do you currently use in your classroom? So do we have any things from folks in person or folks online?
Well, of course, it's like PowerPoint, projector.
Yeah, so PowerPoint, projector, what else?
I use musical examples, those video clips, things of that sort.
Okay, so music videos from a wide variety of sources. I bet many folks online probably use Canvas as well. Canvas is a technology.
Illinois Google app.
Okay, so a syllabus, Google app. I'm really excited about syllabus because it can be either digital or physical. I tend to take a really broad definition of what a technology could be. So I'm sure many of you also use things like a whiteboard or a chalkboard. We can also think about technologies as things that are physical, like the seating arrangement. So are you working with a fixed lecture hall? Are you working with a room that has movable chairs and you arrange things in a circle? So there are a lot of digital and analog tools that we use in our classroom that inflect how students engage with information and build new knowledge. Are there any other additional technologies from the chat?
A couple people did say virtual whiteboard.
Oh, yeah.
Canvas, Moodle, Menti.com.
Yep.
And someone else said handouts and other physical.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So thinking about different technologies to support engagement and conversation with your students. So I wanted to begin today by just being very transparent about all of my where I'm coming from and how my approach to AI has been inflected by my previous experience. So I'm a former composition instructor while I was earning my PhD in British literature. I did all the basic comp classes, the intro to college writing, intro to business writing. So I've seen firsthand how difficult it can be for students to approach a writing assignment and how intimidating that can be. But also celebrating the ways that these are learnable, doable skills and walking students through how to develop their own writing practice. I'm also an assistant professor, so I use artificial intelligence as part of my research, machine learning to help improve the accessibility of digital collections, to understand patterns across 19th century texts. I often will use a large language model to help me brainstorm ideas and refine my ideas, as well as convert those pesky citations I forgot to add to a citation manager from one style to another. So I engage with LLMs as part of my research and as part of my writing practice. As a librarian, I support in-class instruction sessions. So having hands-on engagements with technology and walking students through not just how to use a technology, but how that technology helps them think in the ways that they're supposed to be thinking in terms of their own disciplinary norms. And I'm also a student. So this is my last semester as a master's in library and information science student here at the iSchool. And I've been in classes that have had no AI policy, classes that have had a very minimal, sort of just as long as you cite it kind of AI policy, and then classes that are asking for more robust documentation. So I can talk about how I've navigated that landscape at a graduate level, and what kinds of policies have been really helpful for me as a student. So DH approaches. What are the digital humanities? If you ask a digital humanist, you'll get different answers every single time. This is just one definition. Digital humanities, or DH, explores the intersection of the digital and the humanities in two ways. We're using digital tools to better understand art, history, literature, and culture. So using digital tools to approach humanities subjects, and then bringing our humanities perspectives from art, history, literature, and cultural studies to better understand our digital world. And we're often kind of navigating between these two and using them to feed each other. So when we're thinking about digital humanities in the classroom, I draw pretty heavily from Vygotsky and social constructivism, which is a theory of learning that challenges the idea that knowledge is transmitted. So there's a lecturer up at the front of the room transmitting knowledge to the students, and the students receive the knowledge, and that's how learning happens. What Vygotsky emphasized was the social and cultural context of learning to arrive at a theory that argued that knowledge is co-constructed through interaction. The most useful piece, or I think one of the pieces that have stuck with me about this theory, is the activity theory triangle. And if you've attended a CITL workshop on backwards design, you've probably encountered this already, or sort of intuitively know that these are all the pieces that you're managing in a classroom environment. So the first that we'll start with are the outcomes. These are things, learning objectives or learning outcomes. What kinds of skills and proficiencies do you want your students to come away from the classroom knowing? Objects, what kinds of materials help them achieve those outcomes? So things like textbooks, primary source materials, music videos, and. When we're talking about subjects, we're really talking about the people in the classroom environment, the students, as well as the instructors, the tools that they use as part of this interaction, whether it be Canvas or the fixed seating lecture hall or the whiteboard. Um, and then we're talking about at the bottom of this triangle are sort of the foundations, the background things that influences the ways that that students are interacting with materials in conversations with tools. So we have rules, things like not just the policies that are articulated in your syllabus, but the norms of your classroom. Are students used to receiving a lecture? Are students used to discussion? Community, how are students interacting with each other? How are students interacting with you? And then finally, labor. How are students expected to perform work? Are they doing work individually, or are they doing work collaboratively? So when we're thinking about activity theory or about any kind of tool or technology in the classroom, we're really talking about this bigger landscape. So for the rest of today, I'm going to walk through DH and how digital humanities sort of approaches all the different facets of this triangle, especially when talking about AI. I found that this triangle, the activity theory triangle, is super useful, even if you aren't thinking about AI. So I hope that that's one piece that you take forward with you into your teaching practice. If you're looking for a really good example of how activity theory frames digital humanities activities specifically, I highly recommend Dr. Kalani Craig's article, Analog Tools in the Digital History Classrooms, an activity theory case study of learning opportunities in the digital humanities, which asks, what do we do when our classroom setting is not conducive to actually using digital tools? Can we use paper-based solutions to teach digital concepts? Spoiler alert, the answer is yes. DH, the parts of DH, or digital humanities approaches, that I'll focus on really tend to emphasize the ways that students are engaging with tools to better understand objects. So they're engaging with digital approaches, things like mapping tools, network analysis tools, maybe even AI, to better understand humanities materials like primary sources, 19th century text, my British literature roots are showing, images, what have you. And then the outcomes are not just that we're talking about providing an original analysis of material, which is fairly typical of the humanities, but we're also asking students to reflect on that process and how they're engaging with tools, and how that engagement with tools inflected their understanding of the object. So throughout this sort of navigating the landscape, there are three things that DH prioritizes. It prioritizes process, that engagement with tools and learning and creating new knowledge is a process. It emphasizes transparency. So how are we using these tools? What kinds of decisions are we making when we're using these tools? And finally, and this is the real human part of the humanities, we're emphasizing people. How are people affected by technology and this environment in the classroom? So activity theory in action. Where we're talking about process and we talk about AI in the mix, let's focus on this top part of activity theory triangle for a second. So in this case, we need to ask, how are AI tools influencing the ways that students interact with learning objects? This has become an increasingly complicated landscape. So there are three facets of this that I want to talk about today. The first being AI tools can fabricate sources. So we're all familiar with hallucinations at this point, and I'll talk about a little bit about why those happen. Um, Search engines are now incorporating LLMs into their search interfaces. So we'll talk about what retrieval augmented generation is and how it works and how it's influencing how students might find, say, extra scholarship on a particular topic if research is part of your class. And then finally, AI can be used to support student engagement with class materials, and I'll provide a few examples of that. So why do hallucinations happen? This has to do with the architecture of a lot of LLMs. One of the most common forms of a large language model is called a generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT. This is the GPT that gives ChatGPT its name. So it's generative in that it's designed to generate new text and not to replicate sources in its training data set word for word, because that would be a copyright violation. It's pre-trained in that it uses machine learning to study large quantities of text authored by humans in order to understand how language works in a process called language modeling. So this is a very sophisticated representation of the relationship between words. Language modeling has many different forms, but most AI tools that are text-based are running off of large language models that are absolutely massive. And then finally, the transformer is the part of the program that takes the model it has created and generates new text one word at a time, adding an element of randomness to mimic human creativity and, of course, to avoid copyright violation. And it's that element of randomness that can lead to fabricated sources. It can lead to inaccurate summaries. It doesn't happen as often as you would think, but it's still an element of engaging with a large language model. Okay, so to help mitigate the hallucination piece of LLMs, there's a new architecture which helps the computer sort of do a little bit of fact checking, and these are retrieval augmented generation, or RAGs. So the user puts in a prompt. Part of the algorithm will search for results. So when you are now Googling, you will see this in action. It will then feed those results to a large language model and use the results and the language model to feed you a response. So this is how we get things like citable AI, or responses that point you to a web page. However, you always have to be careful for discrepancies between the source and the AI generated answer. Um, I have a story about Copilot quoting my work but not citing me. It happens. Um, so one of the things that the library has been really encouraging instructors and researchers to think about are using AI not for fact finding or information gathering, but instead to support your process. And this first prompt is a variation of something that Michael Curtin developed from Michael Curtin is in the office of the Chief Information Officer's office. Pretend you are a writing coach. Ask me questions about my assignment one at a time until I ask you to stop. And the idea is that you're using a large language model as a conversation starter, and that by articulating your ideas, that you are refining them in a way that's not extracting information from an LLM. These other two are some of my favorites in my writing activities. So suggest 3 possible topic sentences for this paragraph, and adding your text there. And what are the 5 transitions that I could be using between these 2 paragraphs, so that you're using your own ideas, your own writing to drive an interaction with an LLM. And you're also responsible for choosing the best response that fits your audience and your purpose. So shifting to rules, community, labor, and outcomes, and thinking about how AI influences these. So these are some questions to consider as you are developing an AI policy. So how does your stance towards AI help your students understand the role of technology in your discipline? So I come from a very traditional discipline, literary studies, English. Most of our research is consulting secondary sources, using theorists as lenses for reading. And while paper copies of scholarship are still often used and frequently helpful, many people are finding these sources through library search engines and subscription-based databases that we have access to. And these subscription-based databases are increasingly incorporating LLMs into their search interfaces. So even the most self-avowed Luddite, even the person who means well and is trying to avoid AI as much as possible, will still have to engage with an LLM to find scholarship, and to engage in conversations in their field. So I think that, one of the things that we need to consider as we're developing or thinking about if, when, and how to engage with AI is that AI is now becoming so baked into the research process that we need to talk about it in order to prepare students to participate in future scholarly conversations. I think the other thing that to think about is, how does your stance towards AI build community with your students? We'll talk in a moment about accessibility and inclusivity when we talk about people. But that thinking about the relationship between community and rules, your classroom environment and your disciplinary norms, also impacts your relationship with your students. And then finally, thinking about how do your assessments account for student labor? Some classes might be focused solely on the outcome, the quality of prose in an essay. Digital humanities classes often tend to evaluate not just the outcome, but the process. So how did you arrive at your interpretation, or what kind of process did you use? And this is a little bit gives a little bit more grace for the times where the outcome isn't spectacular, but the process is doing the work that you're expecting and demonstrating the skills that you want to see. So I find that, incorporating labor and incorporating process into your evaluation criteria can give students a little bit more freedom to fail, but to fail productively and to understand and apply the kinds of skills that you want them to take away in your class. Okay. So moving on to transparency. So one of the key ingredients to, or the secret sauce of digital humanities, and to really lean into interpretation as a process, is to emphasize transparency. Um, and 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 being upfront with how different aspects of the classroom environment are inflecting the learning process. So when we're looking at the upper part of the triangle, how do you address, or do you address how AI could influence the way that people interact materials with your course? Do you talk about hallucinations if you're using, if a model, how a typical prompt for something in your class could lead to a completely wrong answer? Do you model appropriate use of technologies, including AI, as part of your course? Do you walk your students through search databases or things like that? Thinking about rules, community, and labor, are expectations about classroom behavior and academic conduct clearly articulated in your syllabus? As a student, it has been really stress relieving to have AI course policies in the syllabus. And because it helps me know what uses are appropriate, what uses are not appropriate. We also, throughout the library workshops on AI, we did receive a lot of questions from instructors about what are good policies, what are recommendations. And from the conversations at the Generative AI Solutions Hub, there are no one size fits all policies. It really depends on your classroom environment, your learning outcomes. There are best practices that we can recommend. And I'll talk about a resource in just a second to help you articulate your expectations. This is a related question. Do your AI policies put undue burden on your students? So one of the things that we'll talk about with equity inclusion are things like accessibility barriers. For me, as someone who's working full time and going as a student, I found it so helpful and stress relieving to be able to have the freedom to take my notes and use a large language model to expand them, to review them thoroughly, and to make sure that, it was my work that was driving that conversation. Um, and I felt like I could produce a higher quality document as my final assignment using an LLM that was driven by my ideas than I could if I was having to write it exclusively from scratch. So when it comes to AI policies, the AI in this course Canvas module is one of many tools in your toolkit that you can use to help articulate your expectations to your students. So the model includes a short video introduction to GPTs. What is a large language model? How does it work? It includes an annotated transcript of that video with links to articles, so that you have multiple ways of engaging with this information. It also includes a disclosure of instructor AI use. So, are you using AI to help you refine your assignments? Are you using AI to help transcribe the Zoom call? Things like that. It also includes examples of permitted and prohibited use, and the module very much flags that this depends highly on the discipline, it depends on the course outcomes, and is meant to have to be a conversation starter rather than a one policy fits all. It includes citation guidelines. So how are you expecting students to cite AI if you use it? And then a comprehension check to make sure that students understand what a large language model is, how it works, what it can do, what it can't do, and what your class policies are. If you're curious to preview it, there's a link, the library Canvas exchange. You can self-enroll to preview it. You can also find it in the Canvas Commons by searching for AI in this course or university library. Okay, one of the things that I want to flag when we're talking about AI and academic integrity is sort of the difference between plagiarism and fabrication. So I'll often hear the use of AI described as plagiarism, representing the words, work, ideas of another as their own. What I find kind of odd about applying this specific term is that legally, AI is not considered an author. So in order to be considered another person, there's this slippage of, are you treating AI as a person or are you treating AI as a tool? Um, Fun fact, AI is not an author because the law explicitly states that an author needs to be a human. So this is why wildlife preserves can't copyright paintings created by elephants or selfie photos taken by monkeys. So plagiarism is using an AI tool. Plagiarism, not exactly in my mind, because AI isn't a human author and we can't really apply that legal definition. I see it more as a tool. But it can certainly uh, lead to students running aground of fabrication, falsifying or inventing any information or citation, which is an academic violation and an academic issue, especially when the citation doesn't exist or a statistic is wrong. So again, in uses of AI, the library has been really encouraging people to focus on supporting process and language-based tasks rather than fact-finding or information gathering. Okay, so transparency, thinking about tools, rules, community, labor, especially how this influences you as a teacher as part of this landscape. So if you use AI tools, do you disclose your use of AI to your students? AI can be really helpful for refining your assignments to create like sample responses and walk through them with your students. Most classrooms, especially online classrooms, are using AI tools to help improve the accessibility. So using things like I'm using AI to generate a transcript for you so that you have multiple points of access to the class information. Um, does your use of AI help build community with your students? Does it help them feel connected to you? So I think that like an activity where you take an assignment, you throw it into a large language model, and then you talk about the results, can be a really helpful way to build community with your students because you're talking about disciplinary norms, you're talking about scholarly practice, you're talking about skills. And there's a level of transparency and trust there that you're bringing this out into the open. I think one of the really tricky places of thinking about tools and community has to be when instructors use an AI avatar or a deep fake to create video materials. While this is making it much easier for instructors to create materials, it could potentially sacrifice your community with your students because your labor is part of communicating and building out that community. And I think perhaps one of the most important facets is thinking about students' privacy. So there are some tools that can include AI to help you grade, but that is very much what are the terms and conditions of this tool? Where's the information going? Is it, using student material to further train AI? So you have to be very mindful of the material which tools you're using and what kinds of material you're putting in there. Are you also protecting your privacy and your intellectual property? Are you sharing your lesson plans and assignments with a large language model? And the same goes for things like your image and your voice. So accessibility and inclusivity. So we come to the people part. One of the most important documents, especially early in the conversation about AI in the classroom, was produced by the Modern Language Association and the 4Cs, which is oriented towards community college. And I find that I keep referring to this task force white paper because it not only articulates key challenges when navigating AI in the classroom, but I think it also emphasizes student rights, accessibility, and inclusivity. So some of the points that this white paper made were things like punitive policies often compromise inclusivity. We saw early on that AI detectors do not work, and in fact, that they tend to falsely identify English as a foreign language speakers as AI, their writing as AI generated, or neurodivergent students writing as AI generated. And what I appreciated most about the white paper was its encouragement to focus on reflection and conversation, especially if you have a more restrictive AI policy that doesn't allow the use of AI for things like brainstorming or writing. But you are in a situation where you suspect a student has used AI anyway. The white paper emphasizes using that as a moment for conversation with your students, especially about learning outcomes, how effective the piece of writing was for a specific audience, rather than you having to play the role of detective or police, because that can compromise the inclusivity of your classroom. Finally, I think one of my concerns as a humanist is, especially in thinking about the impact of AI on society and the impact of AI on conversations about labor, is the ways that AI could potentially shift conversations about instructor labor. And I think that clinical and adjunct faculty are perhaps in the most precarious positions when it comes to conversations about AI and labor. So one of my concerns is that if we aren't selective about what we automate in the classroom, that there could be conversations about, well, what is the role of an instructor? Um, so if we aren't, to put another way, if we try to automate all parts of the classroom, rather than selective parts that are supporting student learning, it could lead to a perception of instructor labor as not needed. When I think, especially in the humanities, we're bringing our individual perspectives, we're bringing our expertise, and we are building those learning outcomes and new knowledge through community. So, library resources, this is also the signal that I am going to transition momentarily to questions. But I did want to point out, in addition to the AI and this course Canvas module, and in addition to the many resources which CITL has provided, there's also the library's Generative AI LibGuide, which offers sort of an overview of AI and how it influences research and teaching. We also offer library workshops as part of the rich landscape of offerings on campus. Those will be posted towards the beginning of the semester as part of our Savvy Researcher calendar, and that calendar can be found at go.illinois.edu/SR. There are also recordings of previous AI workshops, so if you'd like to take a closer look at how large language models work, or are curious about how AI avatars are created and some of the positive uses of those, you can go to go.illinois.edu/DH channel, and all the videos are fully captioned, and there are links to transcripts and slides of those as well. So takeaways. When we're thinking about process, emphasizing process and engagement with technology give students key research and information literacy skills, especially if we are preparing students to participate in scholarly conversations. AI is becoming increasingly part of our scholarly landscape, and we need to prepare students to be able to participate in those conversations. I think it's also emphasizing process is thinking about transferable and portable skills that they might not never study 19th century literature again, which would sadden my heart, but that 19th century literature is not for everybody. But if they take the skills, the interpretation, the thinking process away from my class, that's an important outcome too. Transparency. So transparency is key to exposing the scholarly labor behind how we're engaging with tools and how those influence our interpretation. So digital humanities often asks for reflection. When we're thinking about AI in the classroom, this might express itself as documentation, and just being very transparent about your expectations. But above all, people matter most, and thinking about how these tools are helping support your engagement with students and their learning and building community, as well as how is AI supporting your labor and your place within the university community, I think are especially important. So I am always happy to field questions. My email is super easy to remember because it's Mary Tun. Having a punnable last name is a ton of fun. I'm always happy to answer questions about AI in the humanities, the Canvas module, or digital approaches to humanities research. I'd also strongly encourage you to contact your subject librarian. We've had a lot of conversations in the library about how to support instruction. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, come to CITL, come to us, and we can have a conversation about class activities that can help support your learning outcomes, but also give students these kinds of information literacies. This is a spoiler alert, but we will ask for a survey at the end. I'm going to flip back to questions just for a little bit longer, just so that the PowerPoint will stay up. But then now is a good time for me to transition to questions, thoughts, concerns. And I'll keep an eye on Katie for questions from the chat. Nothing.
Mary, I
Yeah.
had a question
Mhm.
about, this is Jamie Nelson. Anyway, so I've been involved with digital avatars and creating digital
Yeah,
avatars
yeah.
that help people do things, but you're teasing like, here's the wrong way maybe to do it. But more interestingly, can you give a little brief, like, here's how I would use
Yeah.
digital avatar?
So I'm going to go back to the activity theory triangle, just to kind of frame my answer a little bit. So I think that, when instructors use AI avatars, it could potentially, affect the students. I personally find AI avatar voices really difficult to listen to for a long time. So if you have longer lectures, like 20 minutes, it can get it's to the point where it's kind of distracting for me to absorb the content. So it hurts my learning, if that makes sense. But I think like the positive use could be an empowering one, an inclusive one. So if there is a student who is concerned about their privacy, they don't want to use their own image or their own voice in a class assignment, an AI avatar is an amazing and empowering way to give that student a voice, but to still protect their privacy, or to help them, especially if a student is concerned about a speech impediment and wants to use an AI avatar instead. I think when we're thinking about AI avatars, we're also thinking about the linguistic inclusivity and the kinds of messages that we're sending to students about accents, speech impediments, and things like that. So I think you have to be mindful of that dynamic, but at the end of the day, I think that especially if a student doesn't feel comfortable using their own voice for whatever reason, that an AI avatar could be an excellent way for them to still meet the criteria of the assignment, get the learning outcomes from the assignment, but also protect their privacy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Hey.
I'm Yumi Liang. Say it. I really like your bring the Bibles and social constructivism in presentation. But and also you emphasize the process for learning. But the society mostly still focus on a lot of outcomes. More
Yeah.
than process, because focusing on processes, taking times, and people always more pay attention to, let's say, research and outcomes. So in that sense, what as in an institution, it's more than just individual instructors just pay attention to logic process when they teach. It's just with teaching with AI. So is there anything that institution need to pay attention to the support individual instructor to focusing on process and they teach their source?
Yeah. Yeah, so to me that's a two-part question. One is about society tends to emphasize the outcomes, the products. Why should we be emphasizing process? And then institutionally, what could we do to help support this conversation about process? So I think that one of the advantages of emphasizing process over product is that the tools inevitably change. And we've already seen how AI has radically evolved over the course of 2 years and will continue to do so exponentially. So by emphasizing process, by thinking like ways of thinking and ways of engagement, we're preparing students for when these tools inevitably change and evolve. So if they have that foundation, those groundworks of broad brushstrokes, how does this tool actually work? They're in a better position to adjust and pivot as these tools inevitably change. So I think that that's one of the reasons to really value process over outcomes, and that outcomes are helping them see the process at work and how they can improve their own process as they develop over the course of the semester and move out into the world. I think that especially when we're talking about institutional support and outcomes, there's a high emphasis on marketable skills and preparing students for the workforce and for life in general. When it comes to digital literacy, it's really important to focus on process and evaluating information in the process of evaluating a tool, just because the landscape changes so quickly. So we are seeing conversations, I think, about digital literacy. What are some of the fundamental skills that students need to know? What are some of the basics about large language models and AI that students need to know? Institutionally, I think that CITL especially is building on a long tradition of thinking about technologies in the classroom and building out assignments and thinking about engaging with material in ways that support the process. So I think that, and the library too is also building on institutional conversations about privacy, about digital literacy, information literacy, media literacy. So I think as I see institutionally, we're seeing things on a continuum that are building on our previous strengths. And there are some really amazing and dynamic spaces institutionally where these conversations are happening. CITL and the Innovation Studio being one, the library being another. We're also seeing conversations through Illinois Computes on the research part, as well as many other spaces on campus. So I think it's tricky to develop institutional policies because, again, no one size fits all, it really depends on the disciplines and the expectations. But I think that one of the successes of the AI Solutions Hub has been to create best practices and guidance around that. So if you haven't seen the Generative AI Solutions Hub webpage, I'd highly recommend checking it out and seeing the best practices that were created by the various working groups. Do we have any questions from our friends online?
Not yet.
Okay. I will pause before I ask a question just to flash the survey again. First of all, we really appreciate you coming. And we are excited for you to continue to, let me see if I can, oh no. I knew there was going to be at least one technical mishap. Thank goodness, like quick slide transition was the only one. But I'd really encourage you to check out the other conversations that are happening through the Summer of AI. I was really excited to see a lot of tools-based ones that are walking through a specific AI tool. So if you want to see how these are operating in action, I'd encourage you to check out one of the workshops or one of the recordings. I also appreciate it if you would take the survey just to help me understand, what was helpful, what was boring, what you really needed another cup of coffee, and what kinds of resources would be helpful for you, especially as you're thinking about your own teaching practice. So this will be the last call for questions before I have a question.
We do have one question.
Okay, hi.
Right, from Alexander. You mentioned how fact gathering and information finding is not a very good use for AI.
Mhm.
What would be some alternatives for students?
Yeah, so I'd say I want to kind of qualify that a little bit. There's a difference between asking ChatGPT to recommend 5 sources versus going into one of the library databases and asking for sources on a particular topic. The difference is that ChatGPT has very limited access to potential sources. It depends on what version of ChatGPT you're using. Do you have a subscription? It also depends on what's free range on the internet. So I think that if you are, it depends on which tool you're looking at, how limited its sources are. When we're turning to things like academic publishers, it's better because you're now searching the database of that academic publisher, which isn't widely available and includes subscription-only sources that have been peer-reviewed. So I think you're getting more robust scholarship that way, but you're also only seeing the work from that publisher. So one of the things that I think is particularly powerful is to introduce students to a wide variety of search tools and databases. And this could be done in conversation with your subject area librarian, who can give a tour of what the databases are, how to search them effectively, especially if you're expecting them to find their own scholarship for an assignment. So yeah, I think it depends on the tool, it depends on what it has access to, but no one tool will ever rule them all because, especially when we're talking about academic tools, because of academic publishers. I'll also say that I think that there is a place for AI in the research gathering process, but it might be to help you refine your search terms. So AI tools could be really helpful tool for saying like, I'm interested in these ideas. Here's my word barf. What kinds of keywords should I put into a library database? And you might get terms that are related or terms that are helpful. But it's still that kind of combination of large language model and a more traditional, if you'd like, search experience. So my question for you is, are there pieces of the classroom environment that feel most exciting to you, or key takeaways or ideas that you might have based on today's presentation? It's a very noodly question.
what I like about it is there's no shame in kind of going through this AI thing together with our students and to kind of come up with community guidelines and this kind of thing. I think sometimes instructors, you know, because you're the boss at the front or whatever, and so you need to know everything. You don't have to know everything. One, there are some resources to help you get jump started, but I think it's okay to kind of discuss things with the students. And again, like you were saying, be transparent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that conversation can be like, look at all the ways that this particular tool failed at this task. Let's talk about what a good assignment does. And that helps students understand what your expectations are and also develop those disciplinary skills. It can be, hey, look at all the ways that this got this right. Let's identify successful strategies in this piece of writing. Why does this work? Why does this work in this context? So I think that really that conversation can go many different directions. Um, there's a version of that activity that has to do with fake sources and generating junk history, where you're asking students to replicate the style of a historic source as a conversation opener for how do you know something is real? How do you spot a fake source? What did the LLM get right about this particular moment in time or this particular historical event? What did it not see? So I think that there is a lot of room and play for you to model a relationship with technology that is really complicated. Barring other questions, this might be the opportunity for for us to get our second cup of coffee this morning and a snack. But thank you again for joining us. If there are questions that you think about in the moments as soon as you exit the Zoom room, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to field those. And I just appreciate you being here today and hope you I hope that you are as excited to continue thinking about your engagement with a wide variety of technologies as I am. Thanks.